None of the 5 children attended her 80th birthday, and she left a surprise in her will that shocked them all. Agatha, now 80 years old, and George, her husband, spent the day together, as they did on all her birthdays. But this year was different. Agatha hoped that her children would show up to celebrate. She and George had prepared everything with care. The house was tidy, with simple decorations, but made with love. The table was set, and the cake, her children's favorite, was baked and filled the house with its smell. "Are they coming, George?" Agatha asked, her eyes sparkling. She knew her children were busy with their own lives, but a part of her still hoped they would come by surprise. George, sitting in his armchair, took a deep breath and answered, trying to hide his worry. "Of course they are, Agatha. They're just late, they'll be here soon." But deep down, he knew the chances were slim. Agatha, though tired, adjusted the presents she had bought for the grandchildren. Small gifts, chosen with so much love, now sat untouched. Time went by, and the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to grow louder with each passing minute. The hours flew, and the silence of the house was only broken by George's sighs and the soft sound of cutlery being set on the table. When night came and the children hadn't appeared, Agatha's heart sank. She sat down next to George, both in silence, staring at the table full of untouched food, as if they still held some hope. But it faded with the last light of the day. "Do you remember when they were little?" Agatha said softly, breaking the silence. "They used to love this cake, and the house was full of laughter." She tried to hold back her tears, but 1 or 2 escaped. George took her hand, gently squeezing it. "I do remember. We did so much for them, didn't we? So much effort, so much sacrifice. And now—" He stopped speaking, his voice weak, not just from age, but from the sadness that filled him. George hadn't been well for a long time. The doctors had warned that he needed to rest, but he insisted on helping Agatha prepare everything for that birthday. George's body was weak, but the worst blow came with the silence of that night. The absence of their children seemed heavier than any physical pain. "I just wanted them to have come, George. Not for me, but for you. You're not well. They should have been here, at least for you," Agatha said, her voice trembling. George took a deep breath, fighting not to show how much it hurt him. "They have their own lives, Agatha. But honestly, this hurts more than any illness. I didn't think it would be like this." The two sat there, side by side, the soft light of the lamp highlighting their wrinkles, while the cake grew cold on the table and the presents remained unopened. When the night was well advanced and Agatha and George were still in the living room, the sound of the doorbell surprised them both. Agatha got up slowly, with some difficulty due to her age, and went to the door, her heart beating faster, thinking it might be one of the children who had changed their mind. But when she opened it, she was greeted by Christine, the dear niece who always remembered them. "Hi, Aunt Agatha," said Christine, with a kind smile on her face. In her hands, she held a simple cake, covered with white icing. "I know it's late, but I thought I'd bring this cake and spend a little time with you." Agatha, though tired and a little sad, smiled. "Oh, Christine, it's so good to see you, dear. Come in, please." She opened the door and Christine stepped inside. George, sitting in the armchair, slowly lifted his head. "Ah, Christine. What a lovely surprise," he said with a weak voice, but clearly happy to see her. Christine went over to him and hugged him gently. "Uncle George, how are you? I thought about you both a lot today. Sorry I didn't come earlier." "You don't need to apologize," Agatha replied while pulling out a chair for Christine to sit. "Just the fact that you came has brightened our night." The 3 of them sat at the table. The cake Christine brought was placed next to the one Agatha had made earlier. The table, which had seemed so empty before, suddenly looked a bit fuller. Christine cut slices and served them as she started a light conversation. "And the children? Did they manage to come?" Christine asked, already guessing the answer but trying to start a gentle conversation. Agatha sighed and shook her head. "No, Christine. None of them showed up. They're all busy with their lives. We waited, but nothing." Christine looked at her aunt with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Aunt Agatha. I know how much that must hurt." She reached out and held Agatha's hand for a moment. "But I'm here, and I love you both as if you were my parents." George, who had been quiet until then, smiled weakly. "We know, Christine, you always remember us. That makes all the difference." The conversation went on, with Christine telling some funny stories from her work, trying to bring a little lightness to the mood. Agatha chuckled softly, and even George, despite his frail health, let out a few weak laughs. Time passed without them noticing. Christine's presence made the weight of the children's absence feel a little lighter. She stayed with them late into the night, and when she finally decided to leave, Agatha hugged her tightly at the door. "Thank you, Christine. You can't imagine how much you've helped us today," Agatha said, her eyes full of gratitude. Christine smiled and kissed her aunt's cheek. "You are my family. I'll always be here. If you need anything, just call me." George, from his armchair, raised his hand in a goodbye gesture. "Good night, Christine. Take good care of your aunt." "I will, Uncle George," Christine replied, before stepping out into the darkness of the night. When the door closed, silence returned to the house, but this time it felt less heavy. George and Agatha looked at each other, and even though they were sad not to see their children, they felt a little more at peace. That same night, after Christine had left, George began to feel unwell. He had been weak for some time, but at that moment it seemed worse. Agatha, sitting next to him, noticed that something was wrong. "George, are you all right? Do you want me to bring you some water or something?" Agatha asked, worried, as she watched him place his hand on his chest. He closed his eyes for a moment and tried to take a deep breath. But the pain was strong. "Agatha, it hurts," he murmured, his voice faltering. Agatha jumped from her chair, her heart racing with worry. "George, what's happening? Talk to me." He tried to speak, but the pain was too intense. His face turned pale, his body heavy in the armchair. Without wasting time, Agatha grabbed the phone and called for emergency help, panic filling her. "Please come quickly, my husband, he's unwell, I think it's his heart," she said, her voice trembling with fear. While waiting for the ambulance, Agatha knelt beside George, holding his hand. "Hang in there, George, they're coming. You're going to be okay, I'm here with you." He looked at her with difficulty, his eyes full of pain, but even so, he tried to smile at her. "I love you, Agatha. I always have," he whispered, his voice weak. Agatha squeezed his hand tightly. "I love you too, George. Stay with me, please. Don't leave me now." The sound of the ambulance finally arrived, lighting up the dark street outside. The paramedics rushed into the house, placing George on the stretcher and taking him into the ambulance. Agatha climbed in with them, holding his hand firmly the whole time. On the way to the hospital, George's face grew more tired. The lights inside the ambulance flickered, and the sounds of the equipment echoed in Agatha's heart. She looked at him, trying to hold back her tears, but the fear of losing her companion of so many years gripped her chest. The paramedics were trying to stabilize him, but George's gaze became distant, as if he knew his time was near. "Agatha," he tried to say, but his voice barely came out. She leaned closer to him, her hands shaking, her face wet with tears. "I'm here, George. I'm here." With one last breath, he closed his eyes, and his hand went limp in hers. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the machines, which soon stopped. "No," Agatha whispered, the tears falling uncontrollably. She knew what had happened, but her heart refused to accept it. "George, no." The paramedic looked at her with sadness, but without words he confirmed what she already knew. George didn't make it. Agatha stayed there, holding her husband's hand, as the ambulance continued towards the hospital. The emptiness she felt was immense. A deep pain consumed her. The man with whom she had shared her entire life was gone, leaving her alone in that dark night. After George's loss, Agatha fell into complete silence. The house, once filled with his presence, now seemed empty, lifeless. She felt alone, and the silence was even more painful because her children remained distant. No phone calls, no messages of comfort. Agatha couldn't understand how her own children didn't care about what was happening. At home, while looking at George's old armchair, Agatha made a decision. She knew she didn't have much time left, and the pain of seeing her children so disconnected from what was happening was unbearable. They didn't even bother to come on her birthday, which had led to George's pain. It was as if the love she and George had given had been forgotten. She had to do something to make her children understand the value of family before it was too late. If they won't come out of love, they'll come for our death, Agatha murmured, alone in the living room. The idea seemed crazy, but she saw no other way. They needed a shock, something to make her children realize what they were losing. She called Christine, her faithful niece. When Christine arrived, she found Agatha sitting at the table with a determined look in her eyes. "Aunt, what's going on? You look worried," Christine said, sitting next to her. Agatha took a deep breath. "Christine, I've made a decision. I'm going to fake my death so they'll have no father or mother left." Christine's eyes widened in surprise. "What? Aunt Agatha, what are you talking about? You can't do that. You're already suffering so much after Uncle George's loss." "I can and I will. My children don't care about me anymore. They didn't even say if they'd come to their own father's funeral. But they need to learn. George is gone and they felt nothing. They'll miss me when they think I'm no longer here, and then they'll realize what truly matters." Christine was silent for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard. "Are you sure about this, Aunt? This is very serious." Agatha looked into her niece's eyes firmly. "I'm sure. I won't rest until my children understand that life isn't just about work and money. They need to learn the value of family, and if I have to fake my death to make that happen, so be it." Christine, still hesitant, sighed. She knew Agatha was determined, and no matter how much she tried to argue, she wouldn't be able to change her mind. "And how do you plan to do this?" Agatha smiled, a sad smile but full of conviction. "I need your help, Christine. I'm going to write a will, but not just any will. I want each of my children to go through something that will make them change, that will make them feel what truly matters. And you're going to help me deliver it to them." Christine nodded, still trying to take it all in. "And what will you do while everyone thinks that you're gone too, a day after Uncle George?" "I'll go away for a while, stay quiet, out of sight. When the time is right, I'll come back, but until then, I want them to go through things they never imagined. Only then will they learn." Christine was still shocked by it all, but part of her understood why. She knew how much Agatha had suffered, and deep down she realized that this might be the only way to open her cousin's eyes. "All right, Aunt. I'll help you, but I just hope they learn before it's too late for real." Agatha held Christine's hand tightly. "They will. I believe they will." It wouldn't be easy, but Agatha was determined. Sitting at the kitchen table, Agatha began jotting down ideas, while Christine, beside her, tried to help her aunt organize everything. "The kids need to go through experiences that make them understand the value of life, family, and what we did for them," said Agatha, holding the pen firmly. "No money or easy inheritance. They'll have to learn the hard way." Christine, watching her aunt closely, asked, "But what exactly do you have in mind, Aunt Agatha? Because it's no use just leaving a few words on paper. They might ignore it, you know how they are." Agatha shook her head. "I know, Christine. That's why we'll do more than just a simple will. We'll make sure each of them has a specific task, something that pushes them out of their comfort zone and wakes them up to life." Christine smiled, understanding what her aunt was planning. "Aunt, that's brilliant, but what about the lawyer? We'll need someone trustworthy to read the will and make sure they carry out the tasks." Agatha gave a small smile, already having the solution in mind. "I've thought about that. We'll hire a fake lawyer, someone who follows our instructions and makes everything seem official. No one will suspect, and you'll be around to make sure it works." Christine was surprised. "A fake lawyer, will that work?" "It will. I know an old family friend who can help with this. He'll play the role of the lawyer and make sure the kids think it's all official. But you, Christine, will be in charge of everything. You'll have the will in your hands, and you'll be responsible for making sure they follow the instructions." Christine took a deep breath. It was a huge responsibility, but she knew how important this was to her aunt. "All right, Aunt Agatha, I'm with you. And what exactly do you want them to do?" Agatha took the paper and began writing carefully. "Each of them will have a task that will shake up the way they live, the way they think. Alexander will work as a caregiver in a nursing home. He needs to learn the value of humility. Emily will have to live on minimum wage for a month. She's always been so focused on money. This will make her see the reality of those who struggle every day. Brittany will work in an orphanage to rediscover what love and caring for others is. Justin will do charity work, serving food to the homeless, to understand the value of family and solidarity. And Jefferson will spend 2 months visiting a cancer hospital, bringing joy to sick children. He'll learn to truly value life. Christine listened carefully, impressed by the thought her aunt had put into each detail. This will transform them, Aunt. If they do all this, they'll come out completely different. Agatha nodded. That's what I want. I want them to reconnect with life, with what matters. I want them to feel what it's like to have real responsibilities, not just think about work and money. Christine took the paper from her aunt's hands and looked at the list. They'll complain for sure, but in the end I think this will change everything. Agatha took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I just hope it makes them realize how short life is, and that you can't get back lost time when you waste it on things that don't matter. Christine placed her hand on her aunt's. They'll realize, Aunt, and you'll be there to see it happen even if they don't know it. In the following days, Christine got in touch with the fake lawyer. He was discreet, trustworthy, and agreed to participate in the plan without question. Agatha wrote the will by hand, carefully thinking through every line, and left everything in Christine's hands, who would be responsible for making the plan work. Now everything was ready to begin. To Christine's surprise, the children took the news of their parents' passing with ease, as if they were strangers. So Christine decided to share the conditions of the will with each of them separately. Otherwise, it would turn into a mess. Alexander received the news about his mother's will with surprise and anger. He thought that after her death, everything would be simple, divide the inheritance and move on. But that wasn't the case. When the will was read, the so-called lawyer revealed a series of tasks, and his was to work as a caregiver in a nursing home. Alexander was in disbelief. "This is a joke, right?" he asked, looking at the lawyer and then at Christine, who was there representing the family. "I'm a businessman. I have a career. Why do I, of all people, have to go to a nursing home and take care of old people I don't even know?" Christine looked at him calmly. "It's your mother's wish, Alexander. She wants you to learn the value of humility, and the nursing home is where you'll understand that." Alexander scoffed, crossing his arms. "Humility? I already know what that is. I worked hard to get where I am." Christine shook her head. "Maybe you've forgotten what it really means. Trust me, this will be good for you." Reluctantly, Alexander accepted, knowing that if he didn't complete the task, he wouldn't receive his share of the inheritance. The next day, he went to the nursing home. He arrived in a suit, as if he were going to an important meeting, but soon realized that this environment was entirely different from what he was used to. A staff member greeted him and handed him a simple uniform, saying with a smile, "Welcome, Alexander. Today you'll help with the daily care routine. There's a lot to do." Alexander looked at the uniform with disdain, but with no other choice, he put it on. The day began with him following the nurse to the residents' rooms. He had to help feed them, change their clothes, and even listen to their stories. At first, he did everything reluctantly, feeling like he was wasting his time. Every task seemed too heavy for him, a man used to giving orders, not taking care of others. But as the days went by, something started to change in Alexander. He began to realize that the elderly weren't just old people, as he had thought. They were individuals with stories, dreams, and many lessons to teach. One day, while helping feed Mr. Octavius, a 90-year-old man who could barely speak, Alexander heard something that deeply moved him. "I had a company, you know," said Mr. Octavius, with a weak voice, as Alexander helped him hold the spoon. "Big, successful. But in the end, none of that came with me. What stayed were the people I loved, and who loved me back." Alexander paused for a moment, the man's words echoing in his mind. He looked at the man in front of him and saw something he hadn't noticed before: vulnerability. It was as if he could see himself in the future, but alone. As the weeks passed, Alexander heard more stories like Mr. Octavius, people who had lived full lives with ups and downs and were now just waiting for a bit of attention, care, and dignity. He started to realize that what he was doing in the nursing home had a much greater value than any contract he had ever signed. The humility he thought he already knew finally began to make sense. One day, while helping organize a small bingo event for the residents, a woman named Mrs. Lucy approached and held his hand. "You know, Alexander, life goes by so fast. You don't want to be alone when it ends. What matters are the people you have around you. Take good care of them." Those words struck Alexander deeply. He realized that over the years he had neglected his own family in the name of professional success. His mother, his father, and even his siblings. He had distanced himself from all of them, thinking that work was the most important thing. One day, after helping a group of elderly people play dominoes, Alexander found himself thinking about his parents. It had been a long time since he'd sat down with them for a conversation or visited them without being in a hurry, just to be present. He began to feel a heaviness in his chest. Work had consumed so much of his time and energy that he couldn't even remember the last time he had spent quality time with his mum and dad before they passed. And that hurt. On his last day at the nursing home, Alexander felt something different. He didn't want to leave anymore. He had grown to enjoy listening to the elderly's stories and helping them. More than that, he had learned a lesson he would never forget. Humility wasn't about success or failure, but about understanding the value of every life, of every moment shared. When his time at the nursing home ended, Alexander returned home with a new perspective. He knew he still had much to learn, but what his mother had done had led him to understand what truly mattered in life. He spent hours crying in the bathroom, hiding, ashamed of himself. Emily had always lived a comfortable life. As a successful architect, she never had to worry about overdue bills or think twice before buying something she wanted. So, when she read in her mother's will that she had to live for a month on minimum wage, she couldn't believe it. "This is ridiculous," Emily said, staring at Christine. "I don't know how to do this. A whole month? How will I pay my bills and my routine?" Christine calmly replied, "That's your mother's wish, Emily. She wants you to understand what it's like for those who have to survive on so little. It'll be hard, but it's important if you want your share of the inheritance." Reluctantly, Emily accepted. At first, she thought it would be easy. It's just a month, she thought. But on the very first day, things started to get complicated. Emily had to leave her luxury apartment and move into a small rented room in a more modest part of town. No air conditioning, no fast internet, and none of the comforts she was used to. "This is a nightmare," she muttered to herself as she tried to settle into the narrow, uncomfortable bed in her new place. At the first supermarket she went to, Emily felt the shock. With the little money she had, every purchase had to be carefully considered. She couldn't grab the expensive brands she was used to and found herself picking simpler products, looking for deals. At the checkout, seeing the exact amount she spent, she realized she couldn't afford to waste anything. So this is how people live, Emily thought, looking at the people around her, who were doing the same quick calculations in their heads before paying. The reality started to hit hard. A week later, Emily was counting every penny. The designer clothes she used to wear stayed in her closet, and she began wearing simpler outfits. She used public transport, something she hadn't done since her youth, and the journeys to work became long and exhausting. The fatigue from her new routine weighed on her, and she started to feel what it was like to live without the comforts she had taken for granted. One day, while returning home, Emily saw a woman with a small child on the bus. The child was crying, and the mother, exhausted, was trying to calm him down but wasn't having much success. Emily watched silently, and when the woman noticed Emily looking, she apologized. "Sorry, he's hungry. We left early and I didn't have time to stop and buy anything," the woman said with a tired smile. Emily remained silent for a few moments. For the first time, she understood a little of what that mother was going through. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was the daily struggle to survive, to care for a child, and still try to hold on to hope. Something Emily, with all her money and comfort, had never had to face. I imagine it must be very hard," Emily said, feeling ashamed for not realizing this before. "Can I help in any way?" The woman smiled, surprised by the offer. "Just knowing you understand helps a lot. We live one day at a time." In the days that followed, Emily began to see the world differently. The challenges she faced, like living with little money, learning to cook with what she had, and making difficult choices were the reality for many people around her. She started talking to neighbors who were in the same situation. One of them, a single mother named Rachel, opened up and shared a bit of her story. "I work as a cleaner, earning minimum wage, and that's what keeps my family going," Rachel said, sitting with Emily in front of the house. "You learn to value every little thing, you know, every meal, every bit of help you get." Emily listened intently, taking in every word. This experience was showing her how easy it was to forget the daily struggles of so many people when you lived in a world surrounded by privilege. As the weeks went by, Emily started to see life in a completely different way. She, who used to never worry about prices and always sought the best for herself, now understood what it meant to live with limitations, to save every last penny, and to make sacrifices. More than that, she began to understand the value of empathy, of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and realizing that for many, life is a constant battle. Sitting alone in the living room, she heard the phone ring. When she answered, the voice on the other end surprised her. "Alex, it's a miracle you're calling me. Is everything okay?" she asked. Alexander was silent for a few seconds, trying to gather his thoughts. "Emily, I just wanted to know how you're doing. It's been a while since we talked properly, and I realized I've been distant from all of you, really." Emily was quiet for a moment, then replied softly, "I've been thinking about that too. I guess, in a way, we've all drifted apart over time. But are you okay? You sound different." He let out a sigh. "It's just that I've been here at the nursing home, right? And listening to these people's stories, Emily, I've realized I've spent so much time chasing things that, in the end, don't matter. I missed important moments, neglected the people I love, and I don't want to keep doing that." Emily seemed to reflect on what he said. "I've been learning a few things here too. Living on minimum wage has made me realize how much I used to value meaningless things. And now I see that the most important thing is the people we have around us." The silence that followed was different from all the silences they had shared before. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, they were truly connecting, understanding what really mattered. Alexander hung up the phone with a lump in his throat, but felt a small relief, like he was taking the first step towards change. At the end of the month, when the task was over, Emily returned to her life, but nothing felt the same. The luxury and comfort were still there, but now she saw everything with new eyes. She realized how lucky she was and decided that she could no longer live ignoring the reality of those around her. What her mother had done had opened her eyes to a world she didn't know, and this lesson Emily would carry with her forever. She would value the well-being of the people close to her, because in the end all that's left is the love of those dear to us, and no amount of luxury can buy that. Brittany had always been surrounded by everything money could buy: parties, trips, expensive clothes, and a busy social life. When she got the task from her mother's will, she was completely irritated. "An orphanage? Me? This makes no sense. I don't even want kids," she complained to Christine on the phone. "Why would my mother want me to do something like this? I've never looked after anyone." Christine, as patient as ever, replied, "Your mother wanted you to rediscover the value of care and real love, Brittany. I think that's what she hoped you'd learn at the orphanage." Brittany sighed, still in disbelief that she was actually going through with it. But she knew that if she didn't complete the task, she wouldn't get her share of the inheritance. So, the next day, there she was, standing at the door of a simple orphanage, far from the glamour she was used to. When she entered, she was greeted by a kind woman, Mrs. Marta, the orphanage's director. "You must be Brittany," Mrs. Marta said with a warm smile. "We're happy to have you here." Brittany forced a smile in return, still unsure why she was there. "Yes, that's me. Just tell me what I have to do." Mrs. Marta showed Brittany around the orphanage. It was a small place but full of life. The children were running around, some playing, others drawing, and a few just watching with curious eyes. Brittany felt a little out of place, not knowing how to act in such a different environment. "You'll be helping with the children today," said Mrs. Marta, pointing to a room full of toys. "Most of them just need attention, someone to play with and talk to. Nothing too complicated." Brittany took a deep breath and entered the room. The children, curious, watched her for a moment before going back to their play. She sat in one of the small chairs, looking around, unsure where to start. A little girl named Clarice came up to her and tugged at Brittany's dress. "Do you want to play with me?" Clarice asked with a shy smile, holding an old doll. Brittany, not really knowing what to do, picked up the doll and gave a forced smile. "Sure. How do we play with her?" Clarice smiled and sat down next to Brittany on the floor, putting the doll in her lap. "I like to play mummy and daughter. You can be the mummy, and I'll take care of you, okay?" Clarice smiled as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and Brittany, at first uncomfortable, began to relax. Clarice's smile was so genuine and full of joy that Brittany slowly forgot her initial resistance. In the following days, Brittany returned to the orphanage daily. Each day brought a new experience, and each day taught her something new. She began to help with meals, organized games, and even assisted the children with their homework. Gradually, something inside her started to change. One day, while helping a young boy named Peter put on his shoes, he looked up at Brittany and asked in his sweet voice, "Are you going to be my mummy now?" The question caught Brittany by surprise. She paused for a moment, her eyes fixed on the little boy. I'm not your mummy, Peter," she replied, trying to stay calm. Peter shrugged, as if it didn't really matter. "But you take care of me, right?" Brittany felt a pang in her heart. For the first time in a long while, she realized she was truly taking care of someone, and that small act of helping Peter put on his shoes meant much more to him than she had imagined. In the weeks that followed, Brittany became more and more connected to the children at the orphanage. They taught her something she had never learned in her life of luxury: the value of simple love, attention, and care for others. She began to see that money, parties, and expensive clothes had never given her the sense of fulfillment that these children were now providing. Each smile, each hug, each kind word from the children was a gift she had never received before. On the last day of her task, Brittany was sitting with Clarice reading her a story. When she finished, Clarice hugged her tightly and said, "I'm going to miss you, Brittany." Brittany, with tears in her eyes, hugged her back. "I'm going to miss you too, Clarice." As she left the orphanage that day, Brittany knew something had changed inside her. She was no longer the same person she had been before. What her mother had done by placing her there was much more than a lesson about responsibility. It was a lesson about love, about the value of the small things that cannot be bought but make all the difference. On the last day of her task, Brittany was sitting with Clarice reading her a story. When she finished, Clarice hugged her tightly and said, "I'm going to miss you, Brittany." Brittany, with tears in her eyes, hugged her back. "I'm going to miss you too, Clarice." As she left the orphanage that day, Brittany knew something had changed inside her. She was no longer the same person she had been before. What her mother had done by placing her there was much more than a lesson about responsibility. It was a lesson about love, about the value of the small things that cannot be bought but make all the difference. Brittany returned home with a new perspective. This time she understood that love wasn't found in the things she owned, but in the people she cared for and the bonds she created. She would never forget what those children had taught her, and as she compared her life to the way her parents had raised her and her siblings with unconditional love, she broke down in tears, realizing she had never repaid them for all the care and basic lessons they had given her over the years. Brittany had finally found warmth in her heart. Justin had always been the most carefree of the siblings. He lived his life surrounded by parties, friends, and without much concern for the world around him. When he read the will and found out that his task was to spend 2 months doing charity work and serving food to the homeless, he wasn't happy at all. "Why me? I've never done anything like this before," he complained to Christine. "Mum knew this wasn't my thing." Christine, as patient as ever, replied, "Yes, she knew that, and that's exactly why you need to do it. Your mum wanted you to understand the value of empathy and generosity. She thought this would help you see things differently." With little choice, Justin reluctantly agreed. On the first day, he felt completely out of place. He arrived at the shelter where meals were served to the homeless, a simple place with big tables and old chairs, and saw a long line of people waiting for food, men, women, young and old, all with tired faces and worn-out clothes. Justin was welcomed by a lady named Mary, a long-time volunteer at the shelter. "You must be Justin," she said with a smile. "Welcome. It'll be good to have an extra pair of hands." He forced a smile back, still unsure how to handle it all. "Yeah, I'm here to help." Mary handed him a ladle and pointed to the large pots of hot soup. "Today you'll serve the soup. It's simple. We just need to make sure everyone gets a portion." Justin started the job, filling bowls for each person who passed through the line. At first he did everything mechanically, not paying much attention to the faces in front of him. He was just there to complete the task after all. But over time, he began to notice the details. Each person who came to him had a story. An older man with trembling hands thanked him with a smile. A young mother with 2 small children looked at him with deep exhaustion, but still thanked him. Justin started to realize that these people weren't there by choice but by necessity. Slowly, his attitude began to change. After a few days, Justin got to know some of the regulars. He started greeting them with a smile and even striking up conversations. One of the men, Carl, was always first in line. He wore the same worn-out jacket every day, but he always had a kind word for whoever served him. "Thank you, young man," Carl would say every time he received his food. "You don't know how much this helps us." One day, while Justin was cleaning the tables after lunch, Carl approached him. "You know, Justin, I used to be like you. Had a good life, job, family. But life takes turns, and suddenly I ended up here. You never know what can happen." Those words stuck with Justin. He had never stopped to think that anyone could fall on hard times. He had always assumed life would follow an easy path for him, but now he saw that reality was much more complex. Over time, Justin began to feel a connection with these people. He started serving food with more care, talking more, and learning their stories. He realized that, despite living on the streets, many of them were good people who had faced challenges he could hardly imagine. And the most surprising thing, they still had hope, still smiled, still found strength in the little they had. One day, while finishing helping set up for dinner, Mary came up to him. "You've changed, Justin," she said with a proud smile. "At first it seemed like you wanted to be anywhere but here, but now I can see you've understood what it's like to be on the other side." Justin looked at her, reflecting on everything he had learned. "I think you're right. I never thought something like this could teach me so much. These people, I used to not even notice them. Now I see they're just like any of us. They have dreams, families, and they want more from life." Mary placed a hand on his shoulder. "Exactly. Deep down, we all just want to be seen, to be treated with dignity, because no one chooses to be in these situations. Life puts them there, and it's up to us to help however we can." In the days that followed, Justin started talking to other men who came to the shelter. To his surprise, he heard similar stories. John, another man who frequented the shelter, was a former teacher who had lost everything after a severe illness. Mark, a former mechanic, shared how he lost his workshop due to debts, and with that, he lost contact with his wife and children. All of them had something in common. It wasn't personal failure that led them there, but a series of events beyond their control. And more than the loss of money, what affected them most was losing touch with the people they loved. One day, after a long conversation with John and Mark, Justin went home reflecting on his own life. He had always prioritized work, parties, and his social circle. But what about his family? He realized that despite always being busy, he never really paid attention to his parents and siblings, even his nieces and nephews who he barely saw. He was surrounded by people but felt more distant than ever. On one particularly cold night, while serving soup alongside Carl, Justin asked a question that had been bothering him for days. "Carl, if you could go back, what would you do differently?" Carl thought for a moment before answering with a melancholic look. "I would have spent more time with my family. Everything else, work, money, it comes and goes. But the moments with the people you love, those you can't get back." Those words stayed with Justin for days. He began to realize he was making the same mistake. He was letting time pass, investing in things that, in the end, weren't as important. What his mother had tried to teach him with this task was finally starting to make sense. When the 2 months were up, Justin returned home with a heart full of new emotions. He started to see the world through different eyes. He realized that life wasn't just about what you had, but about what you could do for others. He wasn't sure if he would continue serving food every day, but one thing was certain: he would never forget the people he met and the lessons he learned about compassion and respect. He thought deeply about his parents, whom he had neglected for so long, and wished he could go back and learn from them while he still had the chance. Jefferson had always been the most distant from the family. Focused on work, his personal achievements, and chasing success, he rarely had time to think about others, whether it was his parents, wife, or children. When he read the part of the will that said he had to visit a cancer hospital once a week and spend time with sick children, he felt confused and uncomfortable. Why did my mother give me this task? I already have to spend time with my kids, and now I have to take even more time to be at a hospital, he complained to Christine. Christine, ever patient, explained, "Your mother knew you needed to learn the value of each moment. These children face huge challenges, and she wanted you to be there to bring them a little joy." On the first day, Jefferson went to the hospital reluctantly. The thought of spending time with sick children made him nervous, unsure of what to say or do. When he arrived, he was greeted by a nurse named Mrs. Marine, who took care of the pediatric ward. She led him to a room full of children, some with shy smiles and others with curious eyes. "Jefferson, these children are incredible," said Marine, smiling. "They fight daily battles, but they just want to be treated like any other child. Play with them, read stories, talk to them. You'll see they'll teach you more than you expect." Jefferson looked around, still uncertain. A small girl named Sophia, her hair thin from treatment, looked at him and waved timidly. He slowly approached her, unsure of what to do. "Hi, Sophia," Jefferson said with a hesitant smile. "How are you?" Sophia smiled back, holding a doll in her hands. "They said if I fight hard, I'll get better. Do you want to play with me?" Surprised by the simplicity of the request, Jefferson took one of the dolls and sat beside her. At first he felt uncomfortable, thinking he wouldn't know how to act, but Sophia's sweetness soon broke the tension. They spent the afternoon playing, laughing, and Sophia even told him about her plan to go back to school when she got better. The following week, Jefferson returned to the hospital and found Sophia again. This time, she greeted him with a big smile. "I knew you'd come back," she said excitedly. And so every week, Jefferson started visiting the hospital, meeting more children, playing with them, and gradually feeling a change inside himself. He began to realize that, despite being ill, these children were full of life, hope, and joy. Every smile he brought to them felt like a small miracle. One day, while reading a story to a group of children, a boy named Lucas, who was undergoing chemotherapy, asked him, "Why do you come here every week?" Jefferson paused for a second, not exactly sure how to answer. He thought about the will, about the task his mother had given him, but realized that wasn't the only reason he kept coming back. He looked at Lucas and smiled. "I come because I like spending time with you. You all make me realize what truly matters." Lucas smiled back and snuggled closer to hear the rest of the story. In that moment, Jefferson understood what his mother had wanted him to learn. Life wasn't just about working and reaching goals. It was about being present, making a difference in someone else's life, even if it was just through a moment of happiness. In the weeks that followed, Jefferson found himself looking forward to visiting the hospital. He met other children like Philippe, who loved playing video games just like his own son, and Ariana, who loved to paint. Her drawings were always full of bright colors, and she often said that when she left the hospital, she wanted to become an artist. "I like to draw flowers and the sun," she told him one day, while he helped her color a large poster. "Because even when everything seems dark, the sun always comes back, right?" Each visit was a lesson, and Jefferson began to see the world through different eyes. These children, who faced so many difficulties, taught him more about courage and love than any other experience in his life. On the last day of his task, Sophia called him over before he left. "You're going to keep coming, right?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Jefferson knelt down and held her hand, now without any doubt in his heart. "Of course I will, Sophia. I promise." As he left the hospital that day, Jefferson felt something different. The task was over, but the impact those children had left on him would last forever. He had learned the value of being present, of offering comfort and happiness, even in the toughest situations. His mother had given him one of the most important lessons of his life, and he knew he would never see the world the same way again. He realized he needed to be there for all the people close to him, and regretted not having spent more time with his father and mother. As time passed, something unexpected began to happen. The 5 siblings who had been so distant from one another started to grow closer in a way no one could have imagined. The tasks their mother had left for them, though difficult at first, had planted a seed of change in each one. Alexander, always the most serious and work-focused, started calling his siblings more often, something he had never done before. One day, he called Brittany, which she found strange at first. "Hi, Alex, everything okay? You never call me," she said, a bit suspicious. "I know, Brittany, I just wanted to check on you. How was your time with the kids at the orphanage? I'm curious to hear about it," he replied, his voice softer than she was used to. Brittany smiled on the phone. "It's been an amazing experience, Alex. There's a little girl, Julie, who I've really grown attached to. She's special. I never thought I'd feel this way, but now I realize these kids have taught me more than I could have imagined." That conversation, which started awkwardly, was just the first of many. Alexander, now more open-hearted, wanted to know more about the others. He realized that listening to his siblings and sharing their experiences brought a sense of connection he had forgotten. Emily had also changed. She began to join family conversations more often, sharing her stories about how living on minimum wage had opened her eyes. "You know, guys," she said during one of their calls, "I used to think money solved everything, but I met people who, even with so little, are happy because they have each other. It's made me think a lot about us, about how we drifted apart." Jefferson, always the most reserved, started to open up as well. "The kids at the hospital taught me the value of being present. Life is short, and I don't want to waste any more time being distant from you all," he said during one of their video calls, something that had once seemed impossible. Justin, who had always lived in a world of parties and superficiality, was now more interested in connecting with his siblings in a genuine way. "I used to think work and money were everything," he said, almost laughing at himself. "But after spending time with those people on the streets, I realized what really matters are the people who stick by you in the hard times." These conversations started happening more frequently. They would talk whenever they could, even if it was just through quick calls or messages. The distance that had once been so wide between them began to fade. They laughed together, shared childhood memories, and for the first time in a long while they felt like a family again. One day, Alexander suggested a reunion. "How about we all get together this weekend? Let's go to the orphanage where Brittany was helping. We can make it a special day for the kids." Everyone agreed enthusiastically. That weekend, the 5 siblings arrived at the orphanage with toys, food, and a strong desire to spend the day together. The children welcomed them with joy, and seeing Brittany interact with them made the siblings realize how much she had changed. At the end of the day, as the children ran around and played, the siblings sat in a circle in the orphanage's garden. For the first time, they felt that something had truly changed. It wasn't just the tasks they had completed. It was the connection they were rediscovering with each other. "I can't even remember the last time we sat like this together, without arguing or fighting," Emily commented, smiling. "Me neither," Jefferson said, looking at the others. "But I think this is what Mum wanted, right? For us to realize that what's most important has always been our family." Alexander looked around at his siblings, smiling. She knew what she was doing, for sure. "I think we spent so much time chasing things that, in the end, didn't matter. Now I can see that." Brittany, her eyes shining with emotion, added, "And now we can start again as a family." Justin, always the jokester but now with a more serious tone, agreed, "I don't want to waste any more time. Not with you all. Life's too short for that." In that moment, the 5 siblings felt that, despite all the time they had spent apart, there was still something strong that united them. They had rediscovered what truly mattered, the love and care that had always been there, but that they had ignored for so long. From that day forward, the siblings made a pact never to let the distance grow between them again. Their family had been rebuilt, stronger, more united, and they all knew that, despite the ups and downs of life, they had each other forever. One day, while organizing her bills, Emily received an unexpected call. It was Christine. At first, the conversation seemed normal, with Christine asking how things were going. But at a certain point, Christine said something that made Emily's heart stop for a second. "I was thinking, your mum is going to be so happy to see how much you've all changed," Christine said, almost absent-mindedly. Emily frowned. "She is going to be happy? You mean, would be, right? If she were alive?" There was an awkward silence on the other end of the line, and Emily realized something was wrong. "Christine, what are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice growing more serious. Christine hesitated, which only made Emily more suspicious. "Look, it's not what you think. It's just, maybe you should come over to my house so we can talk." Emily's heart raced. She knew something wasn't right and needed answers. Without wasting time, she grabbed her things and headed to Christine's house. When she arrived, she didn't take long to get straight to the point. "Christine, what's going on? Do you know something I don't?" Christine, visibly nervous, started to stutter. "Emily, I didn't want to tell you like this, but I think it's time. Your mum, she's alive." The shock hit Emily like a wave. "What? What do you mean my mum is alive? Christine, are you joking with me?" Christine took a deep breath, realizing there was no turning back. "It was all part of a plan, Emily. Your mum thought this was the only way to make you all wake up, to make you value the family. She wanted to teach you all an important lesson and thought faking her death was the only way." Emily felt a mix of anger, pain, and confusion. "You're telling me Mum's been alive this whole time? And you knew? You helped her do this?" Christine lowered her head, clearly regretting her role. "I did help, she asked me, and I thought maybe it was the only way to open your eyes. I didn't want to deceive you, Emily, but your mum believed it was necessary after you all ignored her birthday, and your father couldn't bear the pain of seeing his children so distant." Emily stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to process what she had just heard. "You lied to us, and all for what? To teach us a lesson? That's cruel." Christine tried to approach her, but Emily stepped back. "I understand how you feel, and maybe I would have reacted the same way, but Emily, look at what you've all learned. Look at how much you've changed." Emily, with tears in her eyes, responded, "That doesn't justify the lie. I was grieving, Christine. I spent weeks crying for my parents, and now you tell me it was all a lie." Christine looked at her with guilt in her eyes. "Your mum thought this was the only way to make you realize what you were losing. I know it hurts, but you've changed, Emily. All of you have." Emily paused for a moment, still breathing heavily, trying to control the anger and pain she felt. She knew she had changed. She knew that the experience had transformed her, but the betrayal was hard to accept. "I need to see her," Emily finally said. "Now." Christine agreed. "I'll take you to her." They went to a secluded house where Agatha had been hiding the whole time. Emily still didn't know what to feel. Anger burned in her chest, but along with it, there was a sense of longing she couldn't ignore. When they arrived at the house, Christine opened the door slowly. Agatha was sitting in a chair, facing away from them. When she heard the door, she stood up and turned around, her eyes meeting Emily's. "Emily," Agatha began, her voice soft. Emily, with tears in her eyes, just stood there, not knowing what to say. After a moment of silence, the words finally came out. You made me believe you were. How could you?" Agatha walked closer, her face full of regret. "I did what I thought was right, Emily. I wanted you all to realize the value of family, the value of being together. I saw you drifting apart and didn't know how to bring you back. But faking your death, do you know how much that hurt me? How much it hurt all of us?" Emily said, her voice breaking. Agatha sighed, tears filling her eyes. "I know, my daughter, and I'm so sorry for that. I never wanted to hurt you, but look at you now. You're all closer, more united than ever. If I could have done it another way, I would have. But I couldn't see another way." Emily stood silent for a moment, trying to process what her mother was saying. She knew, in some way, her mother was right. They were closer now. But still, the pain from the lie was hard to overcome. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mum," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "But I think I understand why you did it." Agatha hugged her, tears running down her cheeks. "I just wanted the best for you, Emily. I just wanted to see my family together again." Agatha took a deep breath. "When your father passed, Emily, I was devastated. But what hurt the most, what truly broke me, was seeing that none of you were there. Your father, he spent his last days hoping you would show up. He kept looking at the door, believing that at any moment one of you would walk in to say goodbye, but you never came." Emily bowed her head, feeling the weight of guilt. She had always used work and the busyness of life as an excuse, but now she realized what it had cost. "I tried to understand, tried to forgive you all," Agatha continued, tears in her eyes. "I know life is hard, that each of you has your own struggles, but what you didn't see was that time with family. It doesn't come back. And when your father died alone, without his children by his side, I knew something had to change. You were all distant, too busy with your own lives, and I watched the family we built fall apart." Emily wiped away a tear that rolled down her cheek, her mother's words hitting her heart deeply. I'm so sorry, Mum. I drifted away. But you faking your own death, that was so extreme." Agatha sighed deeply. "I know, dear. And I never wanted you to go through that pain. But I was afraid of losing you all for good, afraid you'd never realize what truly matters. I saw time passing, and I saw you all chasing things that in the end won't bring the happiness you think they will. Money, success, none of it is more important than being with the people you love. I needed you to see that before it was too late." Emily looked at her mother with a mix of pain and understanding. "So you thought if you pretended to be gone, we'd finally wake up?" Agatha nodded, her eyes full of regret. "I knew it was a risk. I knew it could hurt you, and it hurt me too. But look at what happened, Emily. You're closer now, you're helping each other, you're reconnecting. That's what I wanted. That's what your father wanted." Emily stayed silent, thinking about the past few weeks. She knew her mother was right about many things. Before all of this, she hardly spoke to her siblings. They were all too busy with their own lives. But ever since the will started being carried out, they had begun to talk again, to see each other, to laugh together. That family bond, which seemed lost, was being restored. "You got what you wanted. But it came at a cost," Emily murmured. Agatha took Emily's hand and held it gently. "I never wanted it to be this way. If I could have done it differently, I would have. But I needed you all to see what you were missing before it was too late." Emily looked into her mother's eyes, feeling the truth in her words. "I think we finally understand, Mum. We understand that life isn't about what we achieve, but about who we share it with." Agatha smiled, tears still in her eyes. "That's all I ever wanted, dear. For you to realize the value of family, the value of the time you still have together. Because one day, it all ends, and what's left are the memories, the love, and the moments we build with those we love." Emily took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace beginning to settle in. Deep down, she knew her mother had acted out of love, even if in a way that was hard to understand. They stood there, in silence for a moment, sharing the weight of what they had lived through and slowly starting to heal the wounds Agatha's plan had caused. In that moment, Emily began to see her mother not as someone who had lied, but as someone who was willing to do anything to save her family. The next day, the 5 siblings gathered in Christine's living room after discovering the truth about their mother. They were all still shaken, hurt, and trying to process the lie they had lived for months. The atmosphere was tense, filled with conflicting emotions. They knew Agatha had acted with good intentions, but the pain of believing she was dead was hard to overcome. Brittany was the first to break the silence. I don't know what to think. Part of me wants to be angry, but another part understands why Mum did this." Emily, sitting next to her, nodded, her eyes still teary. "She wanted to teach us something, and she did, but what hurts the most is that we weren't there when Dad passed. How did we not realize how distant we'd become?" Alexander, usually the most reserved, took a deep breath and faced his siblings. "We were too caught up in our own lives. I distanced myself from all of you, distanced myself from the family, and now I see how much that hurt Dad. He left without us by his side. How did we let that happen?" Jefferson, quiet as always, spoke softly. I always thought there would be more time. I kept thinking there'd be another chance to visit, to be there, but that time ran out, and I didn't even notice. Justin, who normally joked about everything, was serious this time. I think we all got lost, each of us chasing what we thought was important, but the truth is, we ended up drifting away from the people who really mattered, our parents and us as siblings. There was a moment of heavy silence, filled with unspoken emotions. They knew the pain was still there, but they also knew, in some way, their mother's plan had worked. They were closer now, talking as a family, something they hadn't done in a long time. Brittany wiped a tear from her face. She was trying to save us, save our family. And if it weren't for this, I think we would have kept going down the same path, not realizing what we were losing. Jefferson agreed, his voice still quiet but full of understanding. She did what she thought she had to do, and deep down she was right. We needed that lesson. Justin looked at everyone, more serious than they had ever seen him. In a way, she gave us a second chance, and now we need to make sure we don't waste it. At that moment, the siblings decided it was time to face their mother together. They went to the house where Agatha had been hiding. When they arrived, she was sitting in the living room waiting for them. Her eyes were filled with emotion, as if she knew this would be a difficult moment. Agatha stood up as her children entered, and before she could say anything, Alexander stepped forward. "Mum, we're hurt. We won't lie about that. Believing you were gone, going through all that pain. It was hard." She lowered her head, ready to accept the criticism, but then Emily spoke. "But at the same time, we understand why you did it. We drifted apart. We lost Dad without even realizing how absent we were." Brittany, with tears in her eyes, added, "I'm so sorry I wasn't there with him. I'm sorry I distanced myself from you and him. We failed as children." Jefferson, his eyes wet with tears, spoke softly. "You wanted to teach us to value what really matters, and in the end, I think we learned that." Justin, with a look of regret, stepped forward. "I just want to say thank you, Mum, for what you did, because even in the strangest and hardest way, you saved our family." Agatha, emotional, looked at each of them, tears silently falling. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted you to suffer like this. I just wanted you to see how much you love each other, how precious your time together is." Alexander took a step towards his mother and hugged her tightly. "We understand, Mum, and we're together again. That's what matters most." The other siblings joined in, forming a collective hug. The pain was still there, but so was the love. A love that had been strengthened by the hard lesson Agatha had given them. In that moment, they realized that despite all the suffering, what remained was the unbreakable bond of family. And finally, they began to forgive, not only their mother but also themselves for drifting apart. They knew that the lost time couldn't be regained, but that there was still so much to build together. From that day on, they promised never to let their family fall apart again. A few weeks after the truth was revealed, Agatha felt she still had so much love to give. Though her children had finally learned the value of family and were united again, something inside her told her that her role as a mother wasn't over yet. She often thought about the children Brittany had mentioned from the orphanage. One child in particular stayed in her mind, Peter, a quiet and serious 10-year-old boy who was sick and needed urgent surgery. Brittany had spoken about him several times during conversations with her mother. "He's so young, Mum, and he's already been through so much. But what hurts the most is that he needs surgery urgently, and because he doesn't have parents, no one can authorize it. The bureaucracy is holding everything up." Those words struck Agatha. She knew she had to do something. With the support of her children, she went to the orphanage to meet Peter. When she entered the room, he was sitting in a corner, holding an old toy. His big, sad eyes seemed to look beyond everything around him, as if waiting for something that never came. Agatha approached slowly and knelt in front of him. "Hi, Peter," she said softly with a warm smile. "I'm Agatha." Peter looked at her without saying anything for a few seconds, then went back to playing with the toy. He wasn't used to trusting people easily, but Agatha felt an immediate connection with him. She knew this boy needed help, but he also needed something more, a family, someone to truly love him. She spent the afternoon with Peter, playing with him and observing his calm, reserved nature. When it was time to leave, Agatha looked at the orphanage director and asked directly, "What needs to be done to authorize his surgery?" The director sighed. "Someone needs to be Peter's legal guardian. Without that, the procedure can't be authorized." Agatha remained silent for a moment, reflecting on what she was about to do. Then, with a determined heart, she said, "I want to adopt him. I want to be the one to take care of him and make sure he gets the surgery he needs." The director's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure, Mrs. Agatha? It's a big decision." Agatha looked at Peter, quietly playing across the room, and replied firmly, "I'm sure. I can't let him suffer any longer. I'll be his mother." The adoption process began immediately, and within days Agatha became Peter's official guardian. She signed the necessary documents to authorize the urgent surgery, and soon Peter was taken to the hospital. Despite all the risks, Agatha stayed by his side the entire time. She held his small hand as he was taken into the operating room, whispering words of comfort. "You're going to be fine, my love," Agatha said tenderly. "I'm right here with you." The hours of waiting felt endless, but Agatha felt something she hadn't in a long time, the strength of motherly love in her heart, pulsing for that small life now depending on her. She knew she had adopted Peter to save his life, but as she spent more time with him, she realized he was also filling a void inside her. When the surgery was over and the doctor arrived with good news, Agatha let out a sigh of relief. "He's going to be fine. The recovery will be long, but Peter is strong," the doctor said with a smile. Agatha entered the room where Peter was recovering and sat by his bed. The boy, still weak, slowly opened his eyes and looked at her. "You're here," he murmured in a soft voice. "I'm here, Peter, and I'll always be here with you," Agatha replied, holding his hand lovingly. Over time, the bond between them grew stronger. Peter started calling her Mum, and Agatha, once unsure about this new role, realized she had loved him as her own son from the very beginning. Every time he smiled or ran into her arms, she felt the same love she felt for her own children. Peter, once a quiet and lonely boy, was now full of life and happiness, knowing he had someone by his side who would never abandon him. Agatha's children, seeing her love for Peter, were moved and happy for her. Brittany, in particular, felt proud of how her mother was caring for the boy with such tenderness. "I never imagined you'd do something like this," Brittany said, smiling with emotion. Agatha, hugging her daughter, smiled back. "Neither did I, dear, but our hearts know when it's time to love someone new, and Peter, he's already part of our family." From that moment on, Peter wasn't just the boy Agatha adopted to save his life. He became her true son, and she became the mother he so desperately needed. And in this way, Agatha's love, already immense, found a new path to grow, bringing even more joy and unity to the family she had fought so hard to protect. Months later, the family was unrecognizable. Time had passed, and with it came a deep change in each of the children and, of course, in Agatha herself. The lesson she had taught had taken root, and now they all lived differently, more consciously and filled with love. They were closer than they had ever been, and something even more special had happened. The whole family had started working together to help the community. One Saturday morning, Agatha's house was full of life. Alexander, Emily, Brittany, Justin, and Jefferson were there, busy organizing donation boxes and sorting food for a campaign they had started. They had decided that once a month they would gather to help those in need, either by donating time or resources. Brittany, who now spent a lot of time at the orphanage where it all began, smiled as she helped Peter, the boy Agatha had adopted, organize toys for the other children. "This has been the best year of my life, you know," she said, looking at her siblings. "I never thought helping others would bring me so much joy." Peter, always with a sparkle in his eyes, looked up at Agatha and said with a smile, "I like helping too, Mum. Can we give these toys to the other kids?" Agatha, who had never been happier, stroked Peter's head and smiled. "Of course, my love. What matters most is that we make a difference." Meanwhile, Alexander was on the phone, organizing the next fundraising event for the care home where he had worked. "Yes, we're hosting a charity dinner, And this time we'll get even more help for the elderly, he said confidently before hanging up the phone. He looked at his siblings with a satisfied smile. You wouldn't believe how much the care home has changed. Now they have everything they need. It's amazing how small actions can transform so many lives. Emily, who had spent the past year involved in social projects, especially helping low-income families, was folding clothes for donation. I never realized how good it feels to help those in need, she said, her eyes glowing. I used to be so focused on my world, on my work, but now nothing brings me more joy than knowing I'm doing something important for others. Justin, always the relaxed one, was in the kitchen preparing meals that they would later distribute to homeless people. The best part of all this is seeing the smiles on people's faces when they get the food, he said, stirring a pot. I'll never forget what I learned at the shelter, and it's amazing to do this with all of you as a family. Jefferson, still involved with the cancer hospital, approached with a box of medicines and supplements they had collected. The children at the hospital are doing better than ever, he commented with a peaceful smile. Every time I go there, I feel like I'm making a difference, and it makes me value the time we spend together even more. Agatha, watching her children working together, felt her heart swell with pride. She had never imagined that her plan, which had caused so much pain at the start, would lead to such a beautiful transformation. Her family, once so fragmented, was now united, bound by love and the desire to help those in need. At the end of the day, after all the donations had been delivered, they gathered in the living room, tired but happy. I think we've finally found our way, Alexander said, looking at his siblings. And most importantly, Emily added, we're doing it together. Agatha smiled, emotional. You all make me so proud. What more could I ask for? You've learned what really matters, and now you're sharing that with the world. Brittany, always the most emotional, looked at her mother with affection. You taught us this, Mum. We're just following your example. Justin, trying to lighten the mood as always, gave a big grin. Well, if this means we're going to keep doing this work together, then I'm in. But on one condition. We always have to have cake afterwards. Everyone laughed, the sound light and full of joy. The truth was, a year later, the Smith family hadn't just overcome their difficulties, they had been reborn. Now, more than ever, they were focused on building something bigger than themselves, helping the community and spreading the love they had rediscovered. As the sun began to set, they all sat down to dinner, chatting excitedly about plans for the next charity project. In that moment, it was clear that the new beginning Agatha had dreamed of had come true. Her family was transformed, closer than ever, and the love that connected them was now spreading to the world around them. It was the start of something even more beautiful, and Agatha knew that together they could do anything. Agatha's birthday finally arrived, and this time it would be very different from the last. The house was full of life, with laughter and cheerful voices echoing through the halls. The sweet smell of cake baking in the oven, mixed with the scent of flowers, spread across the table in the living room. The whole family was gathered, and the atmosphere was light, full of joy and love. Agatha, sitting on the sofa, looked around with a heart full of gratitude. A year ago, she never would have imagined that her family would be so united after everything they had been through. Her children, who had once been distant, were now together, celebrating with her in a way she had always dreamed of. Brittany walked into the living room, carrying a large tray of juice glasses, and joked, "Well, Mum, this year it won't just be you and Dad waiting for us. We got here early this time." Everyone laughed, remembering the previous birthday when no one had shown up. But now everything was different. Alexander stood next to Brittany, placing gifts under the table. He looked at his mother and said with a smile, "This time, we're all here. And the best part is, we're truly together." Emily approached with a bouquet of flowers in her hands. "I brought your favorites, Mum. I remember you always put these flowers on the table when we were kids." She leaned in and kissed Agatha gently on the forehead. "Thank you for everything you did. Today, I understand how important it was." Jefferson, always the more serious one, stood beside Justin, organizing the preparations. He looked at his mother and said, "This past year has been life-changing. I think not just for me, but for all of us. I've learned to value what really matters and I know it's thanks to you." Justin, always the most upbeat, brought the cake from the kitchen and placed it on the table with a big smile. "And don't worry, everyone, this year's cake is better than ever. I personally made sure of it." Everyone laughed, and the mood grew even lighter. Peter, the newest member of the family, ran over to Agatha with a big smile. "Mum, I made a drawing for you." He held up a colourful piece of paper with a drawing full of hearts and flowers. "It's me and you, together." Agatha looked at the drawing with tearful eyes and pulled Peter into a tight hug. "It's the best present I could ever receive, my love. Thank you." When everyone was finally gathered around the table, Alexander looked at his siblings and said, "I think we should say something to Mum before we cut the cake. She deserves it." Emily was the first to speak, holding Agatha's hand. "Mum, what you did for us, even though it was hard, brought us back together. You showed us the value of family, and today we're better because of you. I love you." Brittany, always more emotional, added, "Mum, you are our heart. Everything you did was out of love, and I'm so grateful for that. We'll never forget what you taught us." Jefferson, calm as ever, looked at Agatha with affection. "It took me a while to understand, but now I see you did what you thought was necessary, and I thank you for that. I love you, Mum." Justin, with a mischievous smile, tried to lighten the emotion, but the sincerity was in his eyes. "I know I've always been the most laid back, but I've learned the lesson. Today I understand that what matters most are the people we share life with. I love you, Mum." Agatha, emotional, looked at each of her children. Silent tears ran down her face as she felt the love that now united them so strongly. "I love each of you more than you can imagine," she said with a choked voice. "And seeing you all like this together is the greatest gift I could ever receive." Alexander picked up the knife and cut the first slice of cake, handing it to Agatha. "I think this is the slice of happiness, Mum. You deserve it more than any of us." And so, with laughter, old stories and new memories being made, the Smith family celebrated not only Agatha's birthday, but the rediscovery of love and the value of family. That moment was living proof that, despite the challenges, they had found their way back to each other. Agatha's drastic plan, which had caused so much conflict, was now seen as the turning point that had transformed all their lives. They were there together, stronger than ever. And as the sun set and the evening came, the house was filled with laughter, love, and, above all, the certainty that, no matter what, they would always have each other. From that moment on, it was a new beginning, marked by unconditional love and the lessons they had learned along the way. So we've reached the end of this story. If you've made it this far, please leave your thoughts in a comment, share what you thought of the story or what you learned from it. And I'll leave you here with a few more stories that I'm sure you'll love.